Lorraine Kessler is 69, widowed, and a great deal richer than her family has any idea. One Sunday lunch, she decides to tell them her savings are gone, just to see what they do. I'm Mary. I write these stories for you, I read every comment you leave on them, and I would like to know what you would have done at that table. This one is called Packed Before Dinner. Here is Lorraine, in her own words. You will thank us when the house sells. That was my daughter-in-law, Tara, standing at the top of my own staircase with her sleeves pushed up and a roll of packing tape in her hand. Behind her, in the doorway of the bedroom I had slept in for 31 years, 4 cardboard boxes were stacked against the wall with my name written down the side in black marker. Lorraine, printed neat and square, the way you label a thing that is going somewhere. It was 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. At 1:30, over pot roast, I had told the two of them that my money was gone. 90 minutes. That is how long it took them to pack my bedroom. In the pocket of my cardigan, folded twice, was an envelope from the trust company in Clayton. It had come Friday and I had not opened it, because I did not need to open it. I knew the number printed inside. $6.2 million, give or take whatever the market had done that week. I stood on the stairs with my hand on the rail, and I let her finish her sentence. By 9 o'clock that night, I would know exactly what my family thought I was worth. My name is Lorraine Kessler. I have lived in the same house on Bompard Avenue in Webster Groves, Missouri, since Walt and I bought it in 1993 for $109,000. Walt was a dentist. That is what people said at his funeral, and it is true, and it is also about a third of the truth. I ran the practice. For 31 years, I did the scheduling, the billing, the insurance appeals, the payroll, the lease negotiations, and the 2 conversations a year with the bank that Walt could not stand to have. He looked in mouths. I looked at everything else. When we sold the practice in 2018, the buyer's attorney kept addressing his questions to Walt, and Walt kept turning his head toward me like a man watching a tennis match, until finally the attorney gave up and asked me directly about the amortization on the equipment. We sold for more than either of us expected. Walt had 3 good years after that. He died in the spring of 2021, in his own bed, holding my hand and complaining about the pillows. After the funeral, I sat down with a woman named Arlene Boyd, an attorney in Clayton, who had been recommended to me by a hygienist we employed for 20 years. Arlene is 66, wears reading glasses on a beaded chain, and once told me that half her job is watching people sign things they have not read. We put everything into a revocable trust that April, in an office with a dying fern in the window. I am the trustee. Nothing moves unless I sign it. Curtis and his wife are named to inherit, and so is my granddaughter, and none of the 3 of them has ever been told a number, and that was my choice, and I made it on purpose. That last part is the part I need to explain, because people hear it and assume shame. It was not shame. I had an older sister named Junie. She died in 2011 and left $400 and some thousand, split between her 2 boys. Those 2 boys had gone camping together every summer of their lives. They have not spoken to each other since the estate closed. Not one word, 13 years, over a lake cabin and a coin collection, and who took Mama's ring to the appraiser first. I stood in a funeral home in Rolla and watched 2 grown men who loved each other stop being brothers over money that neither of them had earned. So I made a decision. My family would know I was comfortable. They would not know the number. I would help where I chose to help, and I would help generously, and I would never once let a figure sit between me and the people I loved like a third person at the table. I thought that was wisdom. For 13 years it was, and then it turned out I had also built a very good place for someone to hide. The boxes on the landing were not the worst thing that happened in my house that day. 1 o'clock that afternoon, my dining room, the good plates. Sunday lunch was mine. It had been mine since Walt died, and it was the one thing I asked for. 1 o'clock, my dining room, pot roast in the fall, and ham in the spring. My son Curtis came. Curtis is 43. He sells commercial flooring for a distributor out of Earth City, and he is good at it, the way gentle men are good at sales. People trust him, and he lets them. He has his father's hands and none of his father's stubbornness. Tara came too. Tara is 41, and she has been married to Curtis for 9 years. She runs a home goods shop in Kirkwood called Marigold and Vine. Candles, linen napkins, those little brass scissors nobody uses. It is a beautiful store. I paid $38,600 for the build-out in 2022, and I did it gladly, and I never asked for a dollar of it back. And Paige came when she could. Paige is 24, Curtis's daughter from his first marriage, and she works nights as a veterinary technician at an emergency clinic in Maplewood. She shows up in scrubs with her hair still smelling like antiseptic, and she eats 2 plates and falls asleep in the wing chair by the window. She has never once asked me about money. Not what I have, not what I plan to do with it, not whether I have thought about the future, which is the phrase people use when they mean something else. That Sunday, Paige was working a shift. It was Curtis, Tara, and me. I want to be honest about something because it is the part people skip. I did not wake up that morning planning to lie to my family. What I woke up planning to do was tell them the truth about something else. 3 weeks earlier, my cardiologist had put a name on the flutter I had been ignoring since Christmas, and had used the word procedure, and had scheduled it for the 2nd week of November. Nothing frightening, nothing that most people do not walk out of in 2 days. But I live alone, and I had spent 2 weeks thinking about what would happen if I went into a hospital and did not walk back out on schedule. So I had a plan for that lunch. I was going to tell them about the procedure, and I was going to ask Curtis whether he could stay in the house for a week afterward. Tara got there first, not to the house, to the subject. She had been at me about the house since June. It started so gently I could not have described it to anyone as a problem. Did I ever think the stairs would get hard? Did I know that a place 2 blocks from her store had just come on the market? 1 level, no yard. Had I looked at what Bompard Avenue was selling for now, because a friend of hers who does staging had said, just casually, that a house like mine with the original woodwork would move in 11 days. 11 days. She had a number. I noticed the number. At Easter, she had sat me at the end of the table, past the children, and had said to a cousin of hers, loudly, "Lorraine is our sweet little mother. She does not think about any of that." I was sitting 4 feet away with a serving fork in my hand. In August, she asked me to co-sign something for the store. I said no. I said it kindly, and I did not explain, because Arlene had taught me that an explanation is just a door with a handle on the outside. Tara did not speak to me for 11 days after that, which was, I noted, the same number of days it takes to sell a house on Bompard Avenue. And in October, at Curtis's birthday dinner, the photographer that Tara had hired for her own husband's party arranged everyone on the stairs, and Paige was not in the picture. She had been standing right there in the hall. When I asked about it afterward, Tara said, "Oh, we did immediate family." So when I sat down to Sunday lunch that afternoon, I already had a splinter in my hand. I just had not looked at it under a light. At 1:30, Tara passed the potatoes and said, "So, have you thought any more about the Elm Court listing?" And I heard myself say, "There is something I need to tell you both." I have gone over that moment maybe 400 times. I do not fully know why I changed course. Part of it was the potatoes. Part of it was that word, listing, said out loud at my own table. But mostly I think it was that I was about to hand these 2 people my house keys and my recovery and a week of my life, and some old animal part of me wanted to see their faces first. "My money is gone," I said. "The trust. Most of it. There was a fund my advisor had me in, and it did not hold, and I found out in September. I did not embroider it. I have watched enough people lie in a dental office to know that detail is what sinks you. I said the accounts were nearly empty, that the house was clear but the taxes were coming, and that I did not yet know what I was going to do. Curtis put down his fork. He said, "Mom, just that," and for about 4 seconds, my son looked at me like a boy who has heard a noise in the basement. Tara said, "How much is left?" Not, "Are you all right?" Not, "Who told you?" "How much is left?" Her napkin was still in her lap, and her voice was perfectly level, and I understood that she had been ready for this question for a long time, and had simply been waiting for a reason to ask it. I said I was not sure yet. "Okay," she said. "Okay. So we need to be practical." I have thought about that sentence more than I have thought about the money. By 1:45, she had a pen. By 2 o'clock, she had used the word downsizing 4 times, and my son had gone out onto the porch to make a phone call he did not explain when he came back in. At 2:20, Tara asked whether the house was in my name or in some kind of trust. For the taxes. I told her it was handled. She said, "Handled how?" I said, "Handled." At 2:40, she went upstairs to use the bathroom. At 3 o'clock, I heard the tape gun. That sound is a very particular sound. If you have ever moved a house, you know it. It is a shriek and then a rip, and there is no other object in a home that makes it. I came up the stairs holding the banister, because my knees are 69 years old too, and I got to the landing, and my daughter-in-law turned around and said the sentence you have already heard. Behind her, through the open door, my nightstand drawer was out on the bed. My reading glasses, my rosary, Walt's watch, the little tin where I keep the earrings I wear, all of it turned out on the quilt and sorted into piles the way you sort things that belong to somebody who is not coming back. She was smiling at me. That is the part I still cannot get past. There was nothing cruel in her face at all. I did not shout. I want to say that clearly, because I know what a person is supposed to do in that moment, and I did not do it. I stood on the stairs and I said, "Tara, what are you doing?" She said, "I am helping you. Somebody has to start." And I heard my son, behind me at the bottom of the stairs, say, "Mom, she is trying to help." That was the first time that day my son took her side out loud. There were 3 more before it was over, and I counted them, and I am going to tell you every one. At 3:15, Tara came down and set a brochure beside the gravy boat, which had not been cleared. Cardinal Meadows Assisted Living, Baldwin, Missouri. A photograph of a woman about my age laughing at a jigsaw puzzle. The monthly rate was printed on the back in a font about half the size of the photograph. I said, "I have not been to a doctor about anything except my heart." She said, "It is not about your health, Lorraine. It is about what you can afford." At 3:40, Curtis carried the boxes down to the hallway. He did it without being asked, and he did it fast, the way you do a thing you do not want to be seen thinking about. He set them by the front door in a row. He would not look at me. That was the second one. At 4 o'clock, Tara asked me for the name of my advisor. She said if the fund collapsed, there might be recovery, there might be a claim. And for a moment, one honest moment, I thought I had misjudged the whole day, because that is a reasonable thing to say to a woman who has just lost her savings. Then she said, we would need to be listed on the account to pursue it. And Curtis, from the sideboard, said, that makes sense. That was the third one. At 4:25, she asked whether Walt's mother's china was insured separately or under the house policy. I said I would have to look. She said, I looked. It is not. She had gone into my study. Something changed in me then, and it was not anger. The anger came later, and it was ordinary. This was quieter. It was a small, dry click, like a cabinet latch finding its catch, and after it I stopped being upset and started keeping track. I went into my kitchen, and I filled the kettle so I would have a reason to have my back to the room, and I started paying attention the way I used to pay attention when an insurance company was pretending an appeal had never arrived. At 5:10, I heard her in the hallway on the phone, and what she said into that phone is the sentence I will hear for the rest of my life. My hallway runs from the kitchen to the front door, and the acoustics in this house are terrible, which Walt complained about for 30 years and which I have never once complained about since. She thought I was upstairs. She was standing between the boxes with her back to the kitchen, and she said, low and fast, "No, listen. It is better this way. Truly. If there was nothing there, then there is nothing to fight about. We take the house." Then a pause. Then, "Because he will not do it if she has money. You know how he is. He goes soft. But if she is broke, he will sign anything I put in front of him, because then it is rescuing his mother." I stood at my own kitchen counter, with a kettle coming up to boil, and I understood that my daughter-in-law had just told someone that my ruin was convenient. I did not know then who she was talking to. I found that out 4 days later, and it made it worse, and I will get to it. The folder came out at 5:20, and the folder is where it stopped being a misunderstanding. Curtis brought it. Of course he did. Tara stood in the doorway of my dining room with her arms crossed, and my son sat down in the chair beside me and put a black folder on the table between us, and said, "Mom, this is just so we can help you handle things while you get the heart thing done." I had not told them about the heart thing. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I did. I had not said one word about the procedure. Not at lunch, not after. I had come to that table planning to, and I had never gotten there. Tara said, from the doorway, "Paige told us." Paige had not told them. Paige did not know. I had told exactly 2 people, my cardiologist scheduler and Arlene Boyd, and only one of them takes appointments in my kitchen. Only Arlene had that date, and Arlene had put it in a letter that lived in my file drawer. I opened the folder, 5 pages, still warm from somebody's printer. The first page was about paying the gas bill and talking to the water company, and it was written in that soft language people use on a first page. I turned to the third, and it handed over the bank, the brokerage, and the retirement accounts. The fourth let the holder sell my house. The fifth had my name typed under a line, the date already filled in, and a square box for a notary's stamp. I went back to the second page, where they tell you who is actually getting all of this, and it was not my son's name sitting there. It was hers. I looked at my son. I said, "Have you read this?" And Curtis Kessler, 43 years old, who I taught to read at that same dining table, looked at the folder and said, "I skimmed it." That was the fourth one. I closed the folder, and I said I was tired and that I would look at it in the morning. And Tara said, "The notary is coming at 6:30. She had scheduled a notary, on a Sunday, to my house, before she had asked me. I said, then somebody should call and tell her not to. And that is when the mask came off. And it came off the way it always does, which is not with a shout, but with a sigh, as though I had finally exhausted a very patient person. "Lorraine," she said, "do you understand that we have waited 9 years for that money to matter?" The room went quiet. Curtis's chair made a sound. She heard it herself. I watched her hear it, and instead of taking it back, she doubled it, the way people do when the words are already out, and pride will not let them be alone. "For that money to be useful," she said. "That is what I meant. 9 years of Sunday lunches and Christmas at your table, and being told you are comfortable, Lorraine. Comfortable. Do you know what that word does to somebody who is not?" I said, "You could have asked." She said, "I did ask. In August you said no, and you did not even give me a reason." And there it was, the whole machine, laid out on my dining table next to a gravy boat and a brochure for Cardinal Meadows. She had not built any of this because she believed I was destitute. She had built it because for 9 years I had been the closed door at the end of her hallway, and when I said the money was gone, she heard the lock come off. I said, "It is 5:45. I would like everyone out of my house by 9. Curtis said, "Mom, be reasonable." Tara said, "We are not leaving you here alone tonight." And I said, the only thing I said all day that I would call a mistake, because it gave away that I was not finished. I said, "You are not staying because there is one more thing in this house that you have not thought to look for." I meant the envelope in my pocket. I should have said nothing at all. She went straight up the stairs. I heard my study door. I heard the file drawer, which sticks, and which Walt planed twice and never fixed. And I stood in my own hallway between those labeled boxes and did the thing I should have done at 3 o'clock. I called Arlene Boyd at home on a Sunday evening. She answered on the second ring. I said 10 words. I said, "Arlene, it is Lorraine. They are in my study now." She said, "Do not sign anything. Do not raise your voice. I am at my sister's in Union. Give me 2 hours." She took 1 hour and 50 minutes. The notary came at 6:30. I want you to picture this, because I have pictured it a great many times since. A woman of about 50 in a raincoat, with a stamp and a little zip case, standing on my front step at 6:30 on a Sunday evening because somebody paid her a rush fee, looking at a hallway with 4 labeled boxes in it and a woman in a cardigan blocking the door. She said, "Mrs. Kessler, I'm here for a signing." I said, "There is no signing. I am the client, and I am canceling." She looked past me. She looked at the boxes for what felt like a long time. Then she said, "Ma'am, are you all right in there?" I have thought about that question more than anything else a stranger has ever asked me. A woman I had never met, on a doorstep, on a Sunday, asked me the thing that nobody inside my house had thought to ask all afternoon. I said I was fine and that she should go home to her family. She gave me a card and she said to call the number on it tonight if fine stopped being true. And she went back down my steps to her car and she wrote the whole thing up in her own journal before she pulled away, which notaries are trained to do and which mattered a great deal in November. At 8 o'clock the doorbell rang and the afternoon ended. Arlene Boyd is 5'1". She came in wearing a cardigan over what was plainly the top half of gardening clothes and carrying a soft leather folio, and she did not perform anything. She shook Curtis's hand. She said good evening to Tara. She asked whether she could sit, and she sat, and she took out 4 documents and laid them in a row on my dining table, turning each one so that it faced my son. She said, "Mr. Kessler, I have represented your mother since 2021. She has asked me to explain her position, and she has asked me to do it in front of you both rather than through letters, which is a kindness and which is not required of her." Then she said the plainest sentence anyone said in my house that day. "Your mother does not own this house in her own name." Curtis said, "What?" "The trust owns it. It has since April of 2021, and she is the trustee, and nothing your wife put in front of her tonight reaches it. Page 4 would have sold you a house your mother does not personally own." Curtis said, "Wait." Arlene said, "The second document is the schedule of trust assets as of the 30th of September. She did not read the number out loud. She slid the page across to Curtis and let him find it himself, which is the most merciful thing anyone did in my house that day. I watched Curtis read a figure with a 6 in front of it and 6 more digits behind it, and I watched his mouth open, and I watched him look up at me, and what was in his face was not greed. It was grief. He had spent 7 hours believing his mother was ruined and being talked out of doing anything about it. Tara said, "You lied to us." I said, "I gave you the answer you were already waiting for." She said, "That is a cruel thing to do to a family." And I said, "Tara, you had my bedroom in boxes before the plates were cleared." Arlene put the third document on the table. It was the trust's disqualification clause, and she read it in full, because it is 4 sentences long, and because she wanted my son to hear all 4. Any beneficiary who attempts to obtain control of trust property by pressure, misrepresentation, or a signature obtained from the settlor under duress or without independent counsel is removed as a beneficiary. Removed, not reduced, and there is no appeal written into it. Walt and I first wrote that clause into our wills in 2011, 9 days after we watched Junie's boys stop speaking to each other, and Arlene carried it word for word into the trust 10 years later. In all that time, I never once expected to need it. The 4th she wrote at my table while they watched, in longhand, and handed to Tara. Arlene said, "Mrs. Kessler is not going to make a police report tonight. She may make one later. That is her decision, and it stays open." Then she looked at Tara over the beaded chain and said, "The instrument on this table names you as agent over accounts you have been told for 9 years you know nothing about. I would advise you to consider how that document came to be drafted and to have your own attorney present before you say anything else about it in this room." Tara did not say another word about it in that room. She went out to the car at 8:20. Curtis stayed in the doorway. He said, "Mom, I did not read it." And I said, "I know. That is the part I am angry about." He said, "What do you want me to do?" I took the envelope out of my cardigan pocket. It had been in there since Friday, folded twice, through the pot roast and the packing tape, and the brochure and the folder, and all of it. I held it out to him and I said, "You can carry the boxes back upstairs, and you can take this. It is Friday's statement, and I have not opened it, because I have not needed to look at that number in 6 years, and neither has anyone else in this family. Open it or do not. It is the same house either way." He carried the boxes upstairs, all 4, one at a time, and he put my reading glasses back in the drawer, and he found Walt's watch under a pillow and set it on the nightstand where it goes, and he did not open the envelope. He left it on the hall table on his way out. It is still in my desk. They were gone by 9. That is the end of the afternoon. It is not the end of the story, because 4 days later I found out what my daughter-in-law had actually been carrying into my house every Sunday for a year, and it was not greed. First, what did not happen? It is the part I am proudest of, and it is the least dramatic. I did not call anyone. I did not post anything. I did not phone Tara's mother in Cape Girardeau and tell her what her daughter had said in my hallway, although I sat with the phone in my hand for a while and thought about it in some detail. What I did was write it all down. Times, sentences, who was standing where. Arlene had asked me to on the phone before she got in her car, and it turned out to be the most useful thing I did all week. On the Thursday, I drove to Kirkwood to buy a birthday candle, which is the errand I gave myself and not the reason I went, and Marigold and Vine was dark at 11 in the morning on a Thursday. There was a letter taped inside the glass, turned in, so all you could read through the door was the top of a law firm's name. I did not know what I was looking at yet. Curtis told me the rest in March, in one long sitting at my kitchen table, after he had finally seen the file himself. The shop had been behind on rent since the spring. 2 partial payments in 6 months. On a 5-year lease Tara had signed with her own name on it, because in 2022, the store was 4 weeks old, and no landlord in Missouri was going to take its word for anything. When a woman signs her own name to 5 years of somebody else's building, she needs a plan. Hers needed my signature on page 5, and my son sitting beside me to get it. Whether the voice on the other end of that hallway call was her landlord, or her lawyer, or her brother, I do not actually know, and I am not going to tell you I do. The consequences did not come from me. They came from her own bookkeeping. I never made a report. What existed was a notary's journal entry, made on the evening of the 11th by a woman with no stake in any of it, describing a canceled signing and 4 boxes in a hallway. By Christmas, the store was closed. There was no scene, Just a paper sign in a Kirkwood window and a rack of brass scissors going to somebody in Illinois for 40 cents on the dollar. Curtis moved into an apartment on Marshall Avenue in February. He did not tell me it was happening until it had happened, which I understood. He is in counseling. He told me in March that the phone call he made from my porch at 2 o'clock that Sunday, the one he never explained, was to his own bank to see whether he could get $11,000 against his truck to give me for the taxes. He never mentioned it. He sat at that table for 6 more hours and let his wife pack my bedroom, and he never once said out loud that he had already tried to help. That is my son. He is not a cruel man. He is a man who will do a decent thing quietly and then let somebody louder decide what happens in the room. I have stopped waiting for that to change. I plan around it now, which is a colder thing to do and a kinder one, and he has never asked me why. Paige came on the Tuesday, still in scrubs, having driven straight from a 12-hour shift because her father had finally called her. She stood in my kitchen and cried, which I had not expected, and then she said the only funny thing anybody said all week. She looked at the 4 boxes, flattened now and leaning by the back door with my name still down the side of every one, and she said, "Grandma, they even labeled you." We laughed. We laughed for a long time, and it was not a nice laugh, and it helped. Here is where things stand now, and here are the rules, because Arlene made me write them down, and I have found that writing them down is what makes them real. The trust does not change because someone is sorry. Paige is a named beneficiary and has been since 2021, and she did not learn that from me. She learned it from Arlene, in an office, in April, and her first question was whether it meant she had to do something for me, and Arlene had to explain to her twice that it did not. Curtis is still named. He never asked me to sign anything, and I will not punish a man for what his wife carried into my house. Tara was removed on the 11th of November, by letter, under a clause a dead dentist and his wife wrote in a Rolla funeral home parking lot in 2011. Nobody has a key to this house except me and Paige. I do not lend money anymore. I give it or I do not give it, and I say which one at the time, and there is no third category where somebody gets to be confused about it later. And anybody in my family may ask me for anything, once, in words, at a table, in daylight. That is the whole rule. You may ask, you may not arrange. I had the procedure in November. It took an hour and a half, which I noticed. Paige drove me and stayed the night on my sofa with a dog she was fostering that had to be fed every 4 hours. And Curtis came the next morning with terrible coffee and sat with me for 6 hours without once mentioning anything except a television program neither of us was watching. Bompard Avenue is still mine. The woodwork is still original. It would still sell as fast as her friend promised. And it is not going to, because I live in it. It is June now. The envelope Curtis left on my hall table is in my desk drawer with the 2 that have come since, all 3 of them sealed, and I am not being stubborn about it. I know what is in them. So does everybody else in this family now. That number turned out to be the least interesting thing on my table that Sunday. A person will tell you who they are in 90 minutes if you give them a reason to hurry. That is Lorraine's story. She has still not opened those envelopes. I do not think she ever will, and I do not think she needs to. If you have ever been the quiet one at your own table, subscribe and stay with me. There is always a third act.